My name's Charles Gracey. I'm the president of Hot Seat Services, and today we're going to talk a little bit about Recruiter Bootcamp and what that entails and how your successes can be driven by it. When we're talking about what is Recruiter Bootcamp, it's made up of three fundamentals: communication, basic sales, and the proper use of your ATS or processes within your organization. First one being communication. Words matter. What's in writing and what your recruiters and departments are saying matter. They have to work together cohesively. Do your recruiters speak to the drivers? Are they speaking with the drivers? And are they using lingo that the drivers can use and kind of relate back to? If we're using the same talk we do in the boardroom when we're communicating to the drivers, there's going to be a disconnect. So we have to start with that message. Next is your marketing, your recruiting, and your company. Is the message the same? If recruiting is speaking a different message than what's being presented in your marketing, you're going to have fall off. There's going to be distrust. If recruiting and marketing are communicating the same message, but then the driver gets in the truck and they're working for dispatch and it turns out to be completely different, it's going to be pretty detrimental to the success of that recruiter and that organization in keeping that driver. We all know there's a cost associated with turnover. So having those messages working cohesively and being the same is important. But it all starts from communication, internally and externally. One of the best ways you guys can do that is listen to the message in your marketing. Share that message with the recruiters and make sure ops has a chance to review that message and make sure it works together. Next is the touch points. All right, creating a connection, you start out with touch points, whether it be text, email, in some cases pulse, ATS communications, voicemails. These things matter. Inside these things, you should audit them. What's the cadence to these things? In some organizations that I've worked in consulting, they simply send a text message. That is an attempt, and then it stops there. Well, that's not very efficient use. You're paying money for these leads. These touch points matter. You need to map them out and review what your execution is versus what you have mapped out and make sure that they align. Are we supposed to send a text message on the first day? Are we blitzing the driver? Imagine being the driver, and in 5 minutes you get a text, an email, an ATS message, a phone call, and that's an attempt. Well, okay, if that's your cadence, that's great. What's the next cadence? Are we doing it the next day, same day? Map it out, view it from the driver's perspective, and then turn around and evaluate how efficient it is. Do you have a strategy in place for that? Well, it's simple. Map it out. Write it down, execute, and then go to your department as the recruiter and think about it from the driver's perspective. What's that look like? Are you tracking your attempts? That's a simple one. Every attempt should be tracked, whether it's in a note, a status, a stage, however you're tracking it, you should have this logged somewhere so you can evaluate its successes or failures. Call to actions. This is something I'm going to break into a little bit more. I dive into this a lot in my training. Call to actions is what we're trying to drive, whether it be an action to get an application, maybe a phone call, a response of some sort. These messages have a call to action in them. You need to understand what that is and make sure that your communications is driving to that. Are your links in that call to action representing what you're trying to achieve? If an auto response goes out with a full app conversion link in it and a phone number to your recruiting department, that is an attempt of some sort, but I've seen it where a recruiter has reverted back and said, in my previous communications, there was a link. You're in front of the driver here and now. That link should be present in the here and now, not directing them to go dig up some email from a day or a week ago. So is the information in that call to action present and accurate as well? How many times you guys put something in place and then you go back and review it and you're like, oh, that's out of date. Oh, we're no longer doing that. Well, the drivers are getting that. You spend all this time to get in front of them. The message needs to make sense and it needs to be up to date. Your call to actions need to be using a language to achieve the desired outcome. So if I want an app, I want the link in there. If I want a phone call, I want the number in there. These things matter because you're making it easy for the applicant to achieve what you're trying to drive. So we need to evaluate call to actions in our communications. The next fundamental we talked about was basic sales. You spend all that money to get the applicant in front of you. At the end of the day, we'd be foolish not to understand that we're doing sales. You're selling yourself, you're selling the job. Every relationship, that initial contact should be treated like an elevator pitch. You're trying to get buy-in. In order to do that, we have to evaluate what that looks like. So we're evaluating ourselves, we're evaluating all these items I'm about to go through, which is your offer. As a recruiter, you are the first human contact for that applicant. Before they buy into the company, they're buying into you. If you don't know your offer as a recruiter, as a department, you're gonna have to struggle a little bit with building that relationship. You need to know your company, not just the offer and where you win and all that good stuff that we all know about. Where's its direction? What's its culture? And communicate that proficiently within your communications for selling your company. If you don't know those things, ask. You need to know where you stack up with others. If you think that the driver is going to accept every offer you make and you're not going to have any rebuttals, you're at a disadvantage. You need to know what company across the street's doing. You need to know what the company that's operating in your same area is doing. And when a driver indicates that, hey, I'm thinking about this offer, you're already familiarized with it. So you can combat that and maybe bring some education to the conversation to show light on why yours might be better. Don't just be using bullet points that someone printed out and put in front of you at your cubicle. You need to know where you win. This is standard recruiting. We're listing out where we win, whether it be pay, benefits, home time, culture. Identify those and track them. You also need to know where you lose. You're not going to win across the board. Being honest with yourself, and as one of my good friends says, being honest if your baby's ugly, it will help you in having those conversations. Why does that loss exist? Being able to explain it in a conversation with your driver on why that loss exists in the first place. Maybe you're not the best on pay, but you have consistent home time. You have consistent pay, but you're not the highest paying. Being able to tell them why that exists is powerful in itself. Education in the recruiting process, not only to your recruiters, but to the drivers, is powerful. But you need to be honest and evaluate these points. In basic sales, we've evaluated those, but we also need to evaluate how we can improve. You spend all the time tracking this stuff, you get the data, but if we can't improve and be honest with ourselves, it's not going to help you much. So audit your communications. We have ATSs. You can go back and audit. What does your emails look like? What does your text look like? What's your voicemail sound like when you leave it for the driver, but also what's it sound like when they call you? I can't tell you how many times I've walked into an organization and the voicemail's from their predecessor. Then the line just got transferred on. It's not helping you. Your call to actions can be incorporated into these communications, and you should be evaluating them regularly, improving upon them regularly. The simple next recommendation I have is checking your first and last hour each day. A lot of recruiting departments, that first and last hour is wasted. People are shuffling to get out the door in the last hour, and people are coming in and, hey, I got my coffee, I'm talking to the safety, I'm talking to processing. But those first and last hours can be critical to your operation. Drivers aren't generally going to answer the phone at 8 a.m. when we get into the office. There are some, but the bulk of them are going to get angry when you call. But you can check your voicemails, check those reports that were being ran, have those updates, and be able to put those communications out at a more reasonable time early in the morning. But that first hour, map it out. Make a standard operating procedure of what that looks like and evaluate it regularly and figure out how you can improve upon it. That last hour is critical. Maybe you couldn't get a hold of John Doe in the morning, but in the afternoon, he might not be in sleeper berth. You can now try again before you leave for the day. You need to be accessible and you need to map out what that looks like. You need to be able to track your wins. We talked about identifying them, but how many times has someone sat around a board meeting and everyone said, this is a win? And then when it got deployed out to your fleets, it wasn't quite received the way you thought. Well, we need to track that. And you need to be able to give that information back to those people making those decisions. But none of it matters if you're not tracking where the wins are. Also, equally important is identifying wins that you didn't know you had. So I've seen several scenarios where something small that we were just throwing out there as we just assumed it was a perk turned out to be the substantial win that we didn't even realize we had. You have to think about it from your audience's point of view. In this case, it's the drivers. Ask your drivers, what's the win? If you're not doing this, you can't successfully track them and implement new ways to improve. The next one seems kind of like it should be common sense, but it's often the most hard thing as a recruiter to do because you're dealing with multiple personalities at any given time. And that's building rapport. Building a relationship matters. Again, you are the first human contact in the recruiting funnel. You're getting buy-in for you, you're getting buy-in for the company, and you have a very relatively short time to accomplish this. So building that relationship matters, and you should always be looking for ways to improve doing so. You have to be able to focus on your communication and the efficiency of such, but the easiest way to build a relationship is to solve a problem. Everyone has problems. Very few have solutions. You want to bring an immediate value proposition to a relationship and the building of it, solve that problem. As a recruiter, you have that opportunity right in front of you. Drivers have applications that list why they left. Drivers have conversations that identify why they're looking. They have problems. Connect the dots on their problems to your offer, your wins, and you immediately bring a value proposition to that relationship to help build that rapport. Use their application and their experiences as a guide to do so, and you will win yourself. We also have technology. We live in the day of technology. Sitting there and taking people at word of mouth is over. We can listen to our own self on a call recording. We can look at the response we got to an email or a text message we sent out. One of the best exercises I like to do with my recruiters is make them listen to their own calls. You'd be surprised at the light bulb that pops up with what they said or didn't say, or what they could have done that they didn't do by listening to their own phone call. We often do it ourselves as a recruiting department, but how many actually let their recruiters listen to themselves talk? There's a lot of power that can come from that, and you can see personal growth along the way. I use it as an exercise in our recruiter boot camps that we do for our clients, and you could see the progression of that recruiter as an individual, and then that team grow by being able to listen to their own calls from when they started to maybe a year down the line. Next is objections. We're in recruiting, we're in sales. You're gonna get rejected much more than you're gonna get accepted. You have to be able to accept that and overcome that. You have to predict where those objections are coming and be able to have a rebuttal in a conversation. This is a relationship, there's give and take. So when those applicants or fellow recruiters tell you something that you don't necessarily think might be a loss, be able to overcome it in a conversation. You've identified your wins, you've identified your losses. By preparing yourself for that conversation, you can progress the relationship and improve on your own status as an individual and a recruiting department. Well, we talked about communication, we talked about basic sales, but if we don't have it all compiled in an area that makes sense and helps us, we failed. That's where your ATS comes in, or your internal processes for those that don't have one. First, we're going to talk about knowing your tools. It's like anything else. If you don't know how to use it, it's not going to help you very much. Each one has its pros and cons. Some systems are better than others in some arenas, and some might be better than others in others. So you want to turn around and identify your system and be honest about it. Where does it win? Where does it lose? And what can you do to adapt it to your processes? At no point should you actually adapt to it. There's so many robust tools within these systems. You can make it work for you. In order to do that, you got to get familiar with all the features they have. These things are robust. I'll use an example, autoresponders. Not a lot of people know that you manually have to go in there and ask them to turn this on. I've just talked to a client last week where they didn't have it active. I don't know what the reason, take that up with the ATS, but you should check with why and if your autoresponders are on, and what's it saying? If a lead comes in, we all know that response rate matters. An auto-response is an easy tool to address this, but a lot of people don't know. Call to actions in your auto-response, free advice there, matter too. In-app messaging, you have an audience. You're using text, you're using email, you're using phone calls. But if you have another avenue to communicate with your driver, that's going to help you. You want to communicate on whatever level that they are comfortable communicating. So if I got to send out 5 different forms of touch, if you get a response on one, you've come out ahead. But if you only tried one, you put yourself at a disadvantage. Another one is routing. So a lot of us here Had a job, moved to another job. Did you set up the ATS where you're at now? If the answer is no, you should be asking them about routing rules. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into an organization and we looked at routing, and it was routing based on a predecessor that set it up. That's no longer how the company operates. So when that predecessor set it up, it may have made sense at that time, but through evolution of the company and growth, it no longer made sense. So regularly, you should be asking for a copy of your current routing rules. And with the routing rules, you can turn around and adapt them to what your needs are now. You spend a lot of money on getting leads in there. If they're not going in the right place, it hurts you. Simple things like knowing how to search and filter. These things matter. You build these extensive databases, and a lot of times the answer is throw more money at it. But what about what you already have? Being able to search in it, being able to filter to your current needs, and being able to remarket to those all start with being able to do this. Your recruiters and the entire department should know how to do this. Building templates, efficiency matters. Often we hear the measuring stick of 100 calls, 100 touch points a day. Well, if we can make that efficient for our team, their success is going to be elevated by doing so. So templates, even if you don't have them set up within your ATS, it's simple. Put up a Word document, make all your messages. Obviously, you want to refresh them ongoingly, but turn around and use that. Copy, paste, make it personal. Obviously, again, we don't want to be using the same message for 2 years. You start to sound like a broken record. But these things will help with the efficiencies of your department and how you reach out to the applicants. Next is setting up marketing and ATS to identify leads and the appropriate response rates. We have tons of things that we can do, but we all know not all leads are created equal. A match lead is different than a direct lead. A direct website applicant is different than what you spend on marketing. Teaching your recruiting team the difference is important. That way they can look at the source and treat it accordingly. But if you just say, hey, there's your leads, good luck, well, they're of course going to be at a disadvantage. You want to teach them how to address each accordingly. And that starts with education. Just like you learned it, they need to know it. Tell them the difference of a response rate for a match lead versus a direct lead. A referral. These things matter. So educate your recruiters on how to address each, and they will grow, which will grow your initiatives and yourself as a department. Well, now we've evaluated that. Now we need to become proficient in that. Well, be honest with ourselves. Are we utilizing statuses and stages correctly? Do your statuses and stages represent what's actually transpiring within your company? If they don't, then you're, again, making things more complicated than they need to be. You have statuses and stages, regardless of your ATS. Make sure they represent your honest recruiting efforts. Are you using notes? This is something that all of us have had with all of our recruiting departments, but if John Doe recruiter gets hit by a bus, life goes on as a department. I should be able to hop in there and know where that applicant's at, and notes is a great way to do so. Now, obviously, I don't want my recruiters going out and get hit by a bus, but if it happens as a department, we need to have the infrastructure to support that. So notes is a great way to do it. And a lot of times the notes are very bland. I've gone into systems where it's like, driver's going for this lane. Well, what's the driver looking for? Well, what did they have a problem with their previous employer? What are they aiming for as a future goal? Maybe they like a particular football team. Those notes should be in there. They matter. Obviously, you don't want to have too much in there, but those little notes will help another recruiter or a processor or another person down the line identify and build that relationship should something happen. And at a glance, you as a department can look in there and see how things are progressing. Are they building a relationship, or are they just throwing darts at the board and seeing what sticks? We need to audit our flow, and we need to set reminders for that flow. Reminders, think of it as a kind of kick in the butt to do what you're supposed to do. As a driver, myself in the past, I had people tell me, hey, I'm going to call you tomorrow and give you an update. Well, maybe something didn't update. They were still waiting. Why didn't you call me back? Well, there was no update. Well, I didn't know that because you didn't communicate with me. And you guys are talking to 100+ people a day. Reminders will help you keep those promises and build that rapport because you did what you said you were going to do. Auditing that workflow will also help you in that process. Looking at what that looks like. Hey, do I have reminders set up for day 1? Do I have reminders set up for day 2? You're not going to know that if you don't audit it. So being honest with yourself and your department and having those hard talks on, are we doing what we set out to do, or are we falling short? Evaluate all the areas you can improve. Maybe you set up your statuses and your processes in a way that made sense at beginning of the year. But now things have changed. Look at what it is and look at what you intended it to be and find out a way to improve it. Maybe that's simply adding a new status. Maybe it's a tag. Maybe it's reminders. Maybe it's a SOP that reminds your people what they need to do. A good example of what I've implemented for my team is I use tagging. And when they put things in a status, that tag will go up and remind them to leave a note. Seems kind of redundant, but think of how often people might forget to leave a note. So by putting it in that status, it triggers a response. Did you leave a note? Simple yes or no. Now when I asked them about the note and it didn't happen, I knew that reminder was there. I put that in their head that they need to do so. Do you build out reports? We need accountability. Reports help you identify the accountability, both on your marketing side, your recruiting side, and your processing side. Reports matter, but you need to understand how they are laid out, how to build them, and where to find them. A lot of cases, you just need to ask. I have very rarely seen anyone on the ATS side say, no, I'm not going to help you build this. Ask them, they'll tell you. Some of them might cost you a couple bucks to build, but in the long run, being able to identify those shortcomings are going to help you as a department and save you some money. Do your reports show you everything you need to make your decisions? This is something that's important because what you build is only as good as what you put into it. If you put bad data into it, you're going to get bad data out of it. So understand and ask questions on those reports. What drives those reports? A good example is attribution for a lead source. Sometimes if you don't ask questions, or depending on how you set it up, it's going to change. And what do I mean by that? Say ABC marketing agency sent me a lead. My autoresponder did its job. Driver clicks that lead, or that link, my bad. By hitting that link, it has its own source. It now removed attribution because they did that. But if I can sit there and assign the right links to the right things, and I know I've set up a report in a way that's going to turn around and identify this, I can now track that and the success within that effort. We need to be able to do that, and we need to be able to ask those questions about the reports, the validity behind those reports, and making sure that we built them out in a way to identify the key performance indicators that we're trying to aim for. One of the ways that we've combated this is the funnel reporting. So this is an example of something CDLLife has deployed out to the clients in order to understand the recruiting funnel, as well as to identify areas of improvement. We show leads, how many went to full app, how many went into review, how many made it in the releases, how many made it in orientation scheduled, confirmed, and then hired, and the ratio of each. We also show the time that elapsed. A good example of why this is important is we can see on days to review, it took 15. Now, this is an example. I hope it doesn't take 15 days for you to approve a driver because they're probably going to have a job when you call them. But if this was the example and we're looking at this, if I wanted to cut down my lead to hire time, I can look right there and identify that's the area I can improve. But if you don't have something set up where you can identify this, you're just stabbing in the dark. It's not going to help you. Your gut feeling is not going to help you navigate through this. So utilizing tools like this and asking questions about tools like this out there, it's only going to make you as a department and your decisions stronger. We talked about KPIs. We all know about KPIs. But as a recruiting department, the KPIs I like to talk about is how do you get that applicant from start to finish? Well, these are the ones that are going to help you get there. Keeping your applicant informed. Not just informed of your offer, informed of the process, setting that expectation. That's going to help you. Keeping them interested along the way. Each one of us has a different process. It might be 1 day, it might be 5 days. Regardless of that process, keeping them interested along the way is going to help you get that applicant across the finish line. Keeping them involved in the process. Maybe there's things that they can do along the way that keep them involved, that make orientation shorter. Documents they can submit, videos they can watch. But along the way, you're driving those conversations. Those conversations are happening. So keeping them intrigued about your company, you as an individual that's handling that, and everything that you have to offer down the line. You got through the wins, you got through the pay, you got through the benefits. But some of you have little breadcrumbs that you can drop along the way, perks. Maybe something you do on driver's appreciation or a holiday. Those little breadcrumbs you can drop along the way to maintain their interest throughout your process. Because if you have dead space in there, they're going to fill it by talking to another recruiter, another offer,